Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Mayor, this is James with Fox News. I wanted to ask, the other day, President Trump signed an executive order on migration saying that there will be no more federal benefits for them, and in a way also targeting sanctuary cities in regards to policies that might benefit illegal migrants. Is D.C. going to remain a sanctuary city?
Well, D.C., that term isn't really represented in our law. I think there may have been a piece of legislation that the council passed related to our values, but this is not something that changes any aspect of our, how we operate.
Yeah, Muriel with DC News Now. I know you spoke inside a little bit about just the federal unemployment and what we're seeing. I just wondered if you could kind of give an overview of how unemployment works in DC. Given we have so many federal employees, how do they file and how does that impact residents that don't work for the federal government and might need to apply?
Sure. I've asked Unique Morris Hughes, who is a director of our DOES, Department of Employment Services, which in other places is known as the Secretary of Labor. So I asked Dr. Morris Hughes to come and just provide that short overview.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor Bowser. So filing for unemployment insurance benefits for DC residents or DC workers is the exact same as filing for benefits if you are a recently separated federal worker. I encourage people to visit fedsupport.dc.gov. It's a new site that we have up that explains eligibility criteria and what the process is. But essentially, you file an application. It's online, or you can come into any of our American Job Centers and do it in person. And you will be asked a series of questions. You'll be asked to upload documentation. And then a claims examiner will review the claim and then make a determination on the eligibility of your claim and whether it's approved or not.
And so where does that money come from for these federal workers? Is that DC tax dollars, federal tax dollars? Who pays for that?
So the Unemployment Compensation Program is an employer-funded program. And so federal workers who are recently separated, those funds come from the federal government.
Is that like a reimbursement through your office?
It is. It's like a reimbursement. And so we will seek reimbursement once an individual's been approved. And then the process is we receive funding, and that's how those benefits are covered and paid for. Yes.
Director Trump, could I just follow up on a few kind of specifics? So could you break down for us, if you're a federal worker who took the deferred, I don't want to use the word buyout, but I just did. If you took that, are you qualified for unemployment? If you were laid off but got a severance package, how does that impact your eligibility for unemployment insurance?
So what we understand is that there's been a few different classes of separations here. One, like you've said, that's a deferred resignation, or at least is being described or called a deferred resignation program. The other, separation during probationary period. Eligibility at a very high level is dependent upon several factors. One of these factors has to do with when you are no longer receiving wages. And so for the first question, and I'm going to answer this question generally because there's a lot of nuance and we're still waiting on guidance from the Department of Labor, but generally you're not eligible to receive payments and unemployment insurance payments until you stop receiving wages. So if you are being paid for the next 8 months or you have severance for 8 months, it's reasonable to assume that you may not be eligible right away for unemployment insurance benefits. Like I said, we're going to have to receive some additional guidance from the Department of Labor on how to treat these two separate classes of separations. But generally, unemployment insurance benefits are available after a person is no longer receiving wages and separated completely from employment.
What if they left voluntarily? If they voluntarily accepted the deferred separation, would they qualify once they're salary stopped?
So this is a place where we're going to need the federal government to help us provide some guidance so we can make better sense of how this should be treated. I can only answer at a 50,000-foot level based on a typical scenario. And so unemployment insurance benefits could be received by an individual who is separated from employment, but we need to understand the context and the circumstances around that separation.
Are the probationary workers who are being separated, is that a different?
I would
class?
consider that a different class of separations, and again, another area where we will need some additional guidance on how to treat those individuals. But again, one of the eligibility criteria is if you are separated due to no fault of your own, you are eligible to receive benefits. Now, we have received information that there is different language that's being given to recently separated federal employees on the type or the conditions of their separation. And so there's some nuance here, and we will have to look at cases on a case-by-case basis, and then we're going to have to receive some additional guidance from the feds.
And then my last, and I appreciate it, I
Yep.
know the balance is robust right now that you have on hand to handle these claims. Is there a tipping point? We harken back to COVID when some states actually ran out of money. Is there a number of federal employees or unemployment claims that would cause you concern for the district's ability to keep the fund solvent without having to borrow money?
So I don't know if I would say robust. I mean, the district did have an unemployment insurance trust fund that was COVID impacted and COVID depleted. And so there is a number. We're currently at about $375 million in the trust fund right now. I do want to make an important distinction, which is that unemployment insurance benefits is an employer-paid tax. And so when we talk about federal workers, we are receiving funding dollar for dollar from the feds to cover those benefits. That doesn't necessarily touch the trust fund. The trust fund is used typically for private sector and other entities as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Hey, Mayor, I know you got asked a lot of questions about Trump and D.C., and,
Yep.
and one of his criticisms was crime. I wanted to get your reaction to a couple incidents yesterday, this beating by girls at Union Station that sounded frighteningly similar to what happened with Reggie Brown, at least part of the description, and then the Canada Goose Jacket robbery, and there's a video on social media supposedly of the teen saying he would do it again.
I'm not going to respond to videos. But what's your question?
Well, I mean, what more can the district do, A, to fight juvenile crime, to reduce it, but B, to get teens the message? You can't just do things again.
Well, they have to be held accountable. And our system for juveniles is a rehabilitation system, but they have to be in it to get rehabilitated. So we can't treat juvenile crime as some kind of joyride or kids being kids. Kids have to be dealt with who are committing crimes. And so our police are making good arrests, and we're going to work with the Attorney General's office to make sure that the law is being applied to these kids.
As far as, I mean, what more can be done? I know you made changes to the law, you know, with Secure DC and all. What more can be done to really get the message to these kids?
They have to be held accountable. That hasn't changed. We need more kids who we have a good arrest, we make a good case. They have to be charged and put in the system. And I've said repeatedly, that doesn't mean a diversion. That doesn't mean an unaccountable supervision program. That means we need them in the system. And then you can ask me how we're helping them. And some of the kids that we get in our system, we can get them on a good track. But we need to have them. And we continue to think of ways, even for children who haven't committed any crimes, but they're on their way. And, you know, every parent, every school can identify some kids that if we don't get them on the right track, then the MPD is going to be dealing with them. And it's how do we get families and kids mandatory services, like they have to say yes. And so there are a few tracks that we want to lean into to get kids that type of support. Okay, yep.
Thank you. This is Faisal Ali from the Pakistan Daily. My question is regarding the Kennedy Center cancellation of events. So, as you mentioned before in your address, you can use some of your district attorney to process some legal things. So, you have any authority with the federal government to challenge the measures what they are taking specifically? Because a lot of people who book the tickets and they are expected to attend the events, but they cancel that. So, can you follow some legal things with the federal government?
Well, it's hard for me to answer that question, but the Kennedy Center is created by the Congress, like the board, I believe, and I think that they give the power of the appointments to the president. So if that's your question, we'll certainly look into it, but there's nothing that we believe at this point has been outside of the law as it relates to the governance.
Thanks, Mayor. You mentioned in the chat just over in there that you had a pitch you were going to make to the president about cameras downtown. Yeah. Can you just explain in as much detail as possible what that proposal is going to be?
Well, since I came up with it yesterday, I can't explain it. Well, I can a little bit because we've looked at it before. But we believe, especially, and as I've already said, that cameras, while nothing can replace having a police officer, they enhance our force levels. And so we know that, as I have already mentioned, that there is some usefulness of cameras in kind of predicting crime trends, but for sure there's usefulness in solving crime. And so we think that with a focus on America's 250th birthday, that an idea that we had for more penetration of cameras in commercial areas, especially in the CBD, is worthwhile. It's worth taking a look at.
So would it be asking the federal government to fund more cameras?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I
fair way to
envision.
describe it. Okay. And I wanted to follow up on the sanctuary cities point. During Trump's first term, you spoke repeatedly about D.C., being proud to be a sanctuary city. So what definition were you operating off of then? And has that definition changed, or has something in the D.C. law changed to make us not a sanctuary city anymore?
Well, anytime I speak about it, I'm talking about our values. I'm not talking about any change I made to the law. Like, I made no changes to the law that says we're a sanctuary city. But no time during the Trump presidency or afterwards. And I believe that there is a piece of legislation that passed after the Trump administration that refers to values. So that's what I believe.
Is there a reason why you're not using the term anymore to describe the city?
Because I think it is misleading.
Can you explain more what you mean about misleading?
I think it's misleading to suggest to anyone that if you're violating immigration laws, that this is a place where you can violate immigration laws.
So basically that, like, federal immigration enforcement you are vulnerable to federal immigration enforcement.
You've always been vulnerable. Yeah. The city is not an immigration enforcement agency. No city is. The federal government is.
So what's then your message to undocumented migrants in D.C. now?
We don't have a migrant crisis in our city. So I don't want anybody to think that we have been overrun and we have a migrant crisis, because we don't. We only had an influx of migrants who were bused here. And I might say they were kind of tricked, I think, into coming here on buses from other places in the United States. So we don't have a migrant crisis in our city.
Ashraf Khalil, Associated Press.
Yeah.
You mentioned obviously not wanting to get into the weeds on an executive order that may or may not exist. So I'll just ask the question in a different way. Do you feel that D.C. home rule is under legitimate threat at this moment?
Well, you know that the Congress has threatened home rule in many ways, and it continues to do so. So if you say if it's legitimate, while it's a difficult path, like the Congress is, or I shouldn't say the Congress, I should say some people in the Congress are continuing to use that as a threat.
question on the federal workers. In there, you had mentioned that in the coming weeks, you feel like the city's really going to have to step into support. What does that look like to you, helping our federal workers?
I think it looks like sharing information, and it also looks at how we are strategic in sharing information about available jobs in the region, and I think that we're gonna do some work in that space. Yeah.
One quick question. One on the STEER Act, and the Attorney General today announcing 3 lawsuits against Maryland drivers with tens of thousands of dollars in outstanding tickets. Just your thoughts on that and what message that might send to the thousands of Maryland and Virginia drivers who do have outstanding tickets.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what message this is going to send.
Okay. And on a second topic, Metropolitan Police Department is investigating Florida Congressman Corey Mills for a possible domestic assault case at his home here in the district. NBC4 is reporting that there has been a change to the 251, the public report on that. The first report came out with a very descriptive narrative of what appears to be an assault and injuries to the victim. That report has subsequently been scrubbed down to almost no information, and then a third version of that report was released that now says it's under investigation. And according to MPD, in addition to the investigation with the congressman, there's an internal affairs investigation into the handling of this case, and exactly the narrative I just explained, that the police report was changed 3 times since the incident occurred. Just your thoughts on, one, that this happening with a member of Congress, but 2, that MPD somehow, somewhere in this chain of custody and investigation, dramatically changed the report that had the narrative of what was alleged to have happened.
Mark, I don't know anything about a report being changed, so I can't say anything about that. I can confirm that there is an internal investigation on making sure that all of our members did what they were supposed to do according to MPD policy. So I can confirm that. But I can't speak to anything about the police report.
And anything that you can confirm about the investigation into the member of Congress?
I cannot.
Just one last follow-up on the juvenile crime I was asking.
Sure.
You said about how important it is to get them in the system. Is anybody, Attorney General, anyone else, not doing enough to do that right now, or what will get more in the system?
Fewer kids being diverted or not charged with the crimes that they commit.
Is that a court problem? Is that an Attorney General problem?
It's both. Okay, thank you.